Return of the Exiled, or Why Must I Be the Hero? By T.J. Stegaheis. Read by Yob. Dedicated to Kurt Reimert, whose stories inspired this work. Requiescat in pace. Chapter 21. Tossapan Pass. As they marched to the pass, Sard had his men cautiously attack and harass the retreating snow giants. Not wanting to lose more men, they engaged the giants only when they could see a clear advantage. Often they would attack at night, or when a giant was found separate from the others. 2 more of the huge beings were felled before they reached the pass. Sard lost 5 more men in an ambush. Of the original 30 giants that had slipped through to the south, 18 managed to rejoin the main host. These losses were the messages of men to the snow giants. Tennard found some opportunity to employ his magic skills, but needed to be cautious, as the combatants were too close to risk the heavy spells needed to injure giants. He had already incurred General Sard's wrath by setting ablaze 2 cottages when he launched a fireball at a giant slinger. His shield spell, however, was often appreciated by the retreating soldiers. Soon enough, they reached the camp of Prince Nicholas and the main battle line. The battle scene was a standoff. Between 800 or perhaps 1,000 snow giants were backed up to the cliffs west of the pass. The main force had gained the villages of Hog's Run and the ruins of Kern's Tower before they were being driven back. They had also overrun Green Creek Station, and the garrison had been forced to retreat. From these they had obtained wagons, gates, great logs, and anything else that could be formed in a defensive structure. The armies of Prince Nicholas and General Randon were arranged in a semicircle facing the giants and strongest to the west. General Halford's men occupied the middle of the line. The standards of 2 Tauren noble houses were seen in their midst. A field of sharpened posts had been hastily built in the field between the forces of giants and men. A few tents were erected well back from the lines, and the healers were set up there. The pass, here visible as a narrow defile between 2 cliffs, was littered with wreckage from the wooden watchtowers that had stood there since times forgotten. The prince personally welcomed General Sard, Lady Spovin, Tennard, and Arundel into his tent as their men prepared to join the main force. "Well met and timely, General," he beamed, "but the giants are still unbowed, and we must be cautious if we are to win without great losses," he warned. "So I well know, my liege," answered Sard from his kneeling position. "They do not cow easily." We have allowed as few as we might to rejoin them, my liege," added Lady Spovin, also kneeling. "There are far less to answer for their failure than were sent." General Randon joined them in kneeling before the prince. "You summoned me, your highness?" he said. Then they were all seated and continued with less formality. "The messengers report that you sent the Grolls into full retreat. How was that accomplished?" said General Randon, smiling. "They were discouraged," said Sard with a small grin. "Their champion was felled, and I am hopeful that they will not soon return." "That is good," said the prince, "because there has been a complication." "Ogres, my liege?" asked Sard. "Worse," said the prince. "Their champion, Leaf of the Ice Caves, has joined them now. He is a true frost giant, still surviving. Their morale has improved, and they have their best strategist to guide them." General Halford came in, knelt briefly, and joined them at the conference. "I cannot see how one more giant can be as troublesome as those smelly ogres, your highness," Arundel added. General Randon was about to add something when a horn blast was heard. As one, they all stood and listened. "No rest for us, I fear," said the prince. "To battle! The giants are attacking!" Indeed, the giants were storming the lines, going around the field of spikes to either side and flanking the prince's forces. As the west was already strong, Sard took his men east to help reinforce the Luffian forces there, as General Randon rode off to rejoin his troops in the west. General Halford rejoined his men in the center. Prince Nicholas bade Wendy stay with him in the royal tent. Arundel mounted his horse and followed General Sard. Tennard placed himself outside the tent within the bodyguard, seeking a way to make himself useful. The prince turned and addressed Lady Spoven. The men need to feel that their nobility is safe, so they may turn all of their thought on the fight before them. Also, we have been informed that Our Lady of House Spoven placed herself in harm's way at the recent battle. Men died to protect you. That is not how we expect our men's lives to be spent, dear lady. The prince's voice was stern. Wendy felt the chastisement acutely. She had meant to aid men, and she had cost them their lives. She knelt. I have erred and embarrassed my station, my liege, she said quietly. I beg your forgiveness. Forgiven, Lady Spoven, he replied, but we need to be aware of how our movements affect the lives of others. It is not for your sake that you are kept behind the lines. It is for the welfare of our people. I hear and understand, my liege, Wendy said. I will consider my moves with greater care. The prince offered his hand and helped her to rise. Do you doubt that I would not prefer to be out there facing the giants myself? I feel as a wretch for standing back and letting men die for Tor without me. It is an uncomfortable necessity, he said in a confidential tone. Outside, Tennard noticed a resurgence of activity amongst the giants, and craned his neck to get a better view. They were tearing down their barricade and carrying the pieces to the ends of the line. Some shift in their tactic was coming. He could feel it. Tennard moved to take cover behind a stray wagon and prepared a few spells. Within minutes, the sound of horns calling back and forth took on a note of urgency. Both Prince Nicholas and Lady Spoven went out and beheld the forces of Tor retreating to the camp. To the east, a great giant, fully head and shoulders taller than the rest, strode into the ranks of men, swinging his mace and felling men with each stride. Behind him were slingers, giants hurling large stones at anyone who attempted to flank the huge attacker. Arundel, wild-haired and wielding 2 swords, was attacking the slingers, and felled one of them as they watched. To the west, giants were operating in teams to pitch wagons, gates, and tree trunks into the midst of the men. A man on horseback, most likely General Randon, could be seen feinting attacks to draw the giants towards his men, whose fast attacks to the giants' flanks inflicted wounds and disrupted their ranks. Several giants went down where the other soldiers would make swift work of them. A huge spear, seemingly out of nowhere, landed near the healer's tent. Arrows found the sensitive places of those giants who came close enough. One giant who attempted to break through and rush the lines ran face first into an invisible force and was flung back onto the sharpened poles. 2 others, swinging at enemies no one could see, slammed their weapons into each other's shins and hobbled back to the cliffs. A knot of men trying to dodge giant spear ran into the great mace and were slain. The cavalrymen dashed to and fro, keeping the giants' attention and attacking where they could. With lances, they brought down some isolated giants. Several giants were wounded as magical fire burst in their faces. But because of their numbers, the giants were not much deterred. The lines of men continued to retreat to the camp. The prince's bodyguards and Dell moved His Highness and Lady Spoven to a stone-lined ancient burrow that had been chosen ahead of time against this possibility. Most of the healers had already taken shelter here. The prince and her ladyship were seated on camp chairs, while the bodyguards took up their positions at the door. 2 lords unfamiliar to Wendy joined them. Both men were wounded, and healers laid them on the floor. Soon Celio and Filio arrived at the burrow, left arms hanging and looking exhausted. Nothing frightens those clods, complained Celio. And they're not very easily fooled, added Filio. Lady Spoven looked at the brothers and felt for them. They had been heroes of Gorville City. Now they just looked like two exhausted gnomes. Cilio could easily have taken command of the gnomes covering the Thanatian archers, once again being General Cilio. He chose instead to stay with General Sard and fight as a simple soldier. The fighting was moving through the camp now, and a new sound was heard. Horns, the horns of a new force approaching. "Those horns!" Prince Nicholas said, standing with enthusiasm. "One of them is my father's horn." Indeed, several other horns could be heard, as the fighting outside began to move further away. A higher-pitched horn, another with an odd warble in its tones, and one deep and sonorous, like the earth itself was calling out, as only dwarven horns can sound. When they looked out, the forces were all moving east, towards the pass. General Randon pulled his horse up near them and hailed the prince. "Have you ever heard such beautiful music, your highness? It is King Cyril himself, King Roloff, Prince Frederick, and someone else I cannot identify, marching with them. The giants are in full retreat. We have won the day."
"But lost your miserable lives,"
said a deep, angry voice. A snow giant, with a nasty scar on his face and a look of absolute rage, came from behind the barrow. He had a wooden mace in his hand that Lady Spovin recognized from the farm.
"You have spoiled our chances to rule. You have killed my son. You have humiliated me before my king."
With these words he threw the firewood he'd been carrying into the face of Randon's horse. The animal, hurt and surprised, reared back, and General Randon was thrown. He landed hard and was slow getting up. The giant aimed a vicious kick at him, but Randon managed to roll out of the way. Lady Spovin could bear no more. She drew her sword and leapt out to face the vengeful giant. Dell's protests were lost in the noise of battle chaos. "You fool!" she shouted. "You have the wrong Spovin. I am the one who bested your son. He died fighting a woman." The giant looked down at her and laughed. "I do not believe you.
You think that I, Gundar, to be a fool?"
"He bore the very weapon you carry. He smeared blood on his arms to look fierce," shouted Windyback. "He died on his hands and knees." The giant said no more, but swung his mace at her. Lady Spovin dodged and came around his left side, striking his ribs as she regained a confronting stance. Her uncle was now up and standing beside her. "Your son was the fool, Gundar," he shouted. "He missed the battle by a mile, and so lost Barley Vale for you. Then he lost his Groll army and his life to a woman." Gundar was enraged, as they planned. He swung his mace hard, but both Spovins dodged and came back with solid blows of their own, sod and stones flung up from the mace's impact. He tried to kick at them, and Wendy could feel the edge of his foot pass across her back. They reset for another attack, and suddenly the giant had 4 arrows in his huge arm. The prince's bodyguards were positioned and readying more arrows. The giant heaved a nearby table at them, and they dove for cover. He stood and looked in the direction of the approaching armies. Gundar spat and raised his mace for a killing blow.
"I shall avenge myself on one of you," he said with rage.
Then a flaming mass hit Gundar in the side of his head, burning off much of his hair. "Those are my friends," shouted Tennard. "It is I who will have my revenge. You are an oaf with no respect for the wise and honorable." He stood ready, his wand pointed at the wounded giant. Gundar touched his face with his free hand and turned to face this new threat.
"I am Gundar. It is you who will learn to respect me," he shouted.
The giant took a step towards Tennard. The Spovins both struck at the back of his legs and then dodged away. The wand spoke again. Flame engulfed Gundar's chest. Gundar fell. 2 bodyguards leapt on him with axes. Gundar died. It was fast and bloody, and now it was over. The bodyguards busied themselves putting out some grass fires that the overspill from the fireball had caused. Tennard nursed a reddened left arm. He pulled out a potion from his pouch and poured it on the arm. The last of the snow giants were passing the camp, running for the pass as a vast army pursued them. General Randon and Lady Spovin stood side by side, watching them go. Wendy could identify the standards of Bokenshire, Luffa, an ancient flag of Tor, and an axe on a grey field that could only be the dwarves. The final emblem took her a while to remember. Then she remembered it. She had seen it before, flying proudly over the most beautiful building she had ever seen. It was the flag of Shiro, the emblem of the Saurian people. The Saurians had joined the people of Menodoc on the field of battle. "My liege," cried Wendy, turning to face him, "the Saurians have come to our aid and helped us win the day." "Your Highness," replied Arundel breathlessly, "we have won a glorious victory, with the Saurians at our side. This is a momentous day." The prince stepped from the doorway of the barrow, beaming with tears flowing down his face. "We the exiled," he said, "we of Tor, the Mountain Legion, the Saurians, have won this day for the whole of Menodoc. It is indeed a momentous day." And he held up his face and thanked the divine spirit of the one true God. Then Arundel joined them. He too rejoiced. After all, the elves were with them in some measure as well. It was then that Arundel noticed that the general was leaning heavily on his niece's shoulder, holding his ribs and breathing hard. He helped the lady support him and signaled a nearby healer. The general removed his helmet, and she administered a healing tonic, and he was standing on his own and seeming more normal. He smiled and quietly thanked the healer and the elf. While His Highness was seemingly involved in discussion with the bodyguards, his eyes swept over the three of them. He saw, and he knew, but he let them have their brave faces. Dell and another bodyguard were busily clearing away the debris from the royal tent to ensure that all was presentable. Two other soldiers salvaged a few more chairs for their royal guest. Shortly the host of the armies parted to allow a procession of royalty to approach the tent. The prince, King Thrill on a dashing white horse, King Roloff on a fine black horse, King Heeson IV of Shiro on a chariot pulled by two fine bays, and Prince Frederick also on a black horse. Prince Nicholas, the Spovens, General Halford, and Arundel joined them there, and they all went into the tent. After the awkward protocol of having 3 kings and 2 princes in one tent, they bade each other less formal greetings. "Well met and joyous it is to see all of you, my friends, my father, and especially your Highness Heeson. A most unexpected pleasure to meet you, sir, after our long exchange from Luna City to Shiro," said Prince Nicholas, shaking hands all around. "It gives us great pleasure to be here under such warm welcome," returned King Heeson. "I, too, am glad to see you, my dear friend." "We encountered each other under unusual and beneficial circumstances," put in King Thrill, with a chuckle. "I had gathered the greater part of the remainder of the Luffa's armies to come to King Roloff's aid. Upon landing at Greyport, we headed down the King's Highway of Bokenshire and reached King Roloff, still trying to expel the goblin armies." "More to their surprise than mine," interjected King Roloff. "Yes, well," continued King Thrill, "it seems that after the departure of Lady Spoven and her people, good King Heeson decided that the time to bring the Saurian people and the people of Menodoc together was now. By joining Prince Nicholas in battle to defend all of Menodoc, he is sending a message to all the lands that Saurians are a people, part of this world too, and a people to be loved, not feared." "Except by the goblins," chuckled King Roloff. "They suddenly found themselves in the meeting point of 3 armies. Suffice it to say, they elected to retreat." At this point, a heavy chariot pulled by 4 stout ponies rolled up to the tent. "Ah," said King Thrill, "that should be Prince Dorindale of the Grey Forge Dwarfs." 2 heavily armed dwarfs stepped in and announced, "All hail His Highness, Prince Dorindale." A dwarf in ornate metal armor stepped into the tent, and the royals bowed while everyone else went to their knees. "I bid you greetings, your highnesses, your ladyship, General Randon," said the dwarf. He ignored the elf. Dwarves always do. "I wish to extend the respect and blessings of my father, King Dorindale the Wise,
to all of you on this grand occasion."
There followed a period of greetings and well-wishings, along with many introductions. Prince Dorindale was suitably impressed with Windy's string of titles. He and General Randon had fought together against ogres and trolls, and had a warm friendship. Tea was poured, and the conversation began. The throng of bodyguards, color guards, and flag bearers was getting a bit crowded. Then a runner dashed up, blinked a bit at the collection of royal standards, and delivered his message to King Roloff.
"I am afraid our merriment is at an end," the king said. "A mob of ogres has reinforced the goblins, and they are reforming to attack."
"I thought that they were cowed and would stay in the swamps," inquired King Thrill.
"I suspect that they were sent word that most of the forces of Menadoc had assembled here and are encouraged to make their move now," said King Roloff. "Curse the smelly creatures! Now we must return to the swamps." "A plan on the part of the giants to divide our forces, I suspect," said Prince Frederick.
"The giants know that if we have time to organize a regular force to watch the pass, their chances are diminished," added Prince Nicholas.
"Or they are convinced that the time is favorable, and do not wish to wait for another," speculated King Heason. "Whatever the reason, if the goblins and ogres can get a start towards our rear, we will be fighting a battle on two fronts with all the difficulties that brings," said King Thrill. "My dwarves have an old score to settle with the ogres. Please allow us to join you in marching against them," said Prince Dorindale.
At this point a Saurian runner entered and addressed King Heason.
"My king, a young magician is endeavoring to do something very unwise. He is using the Book of Mud to assault the pass and close it."
"Oh, frogs!" cried King Heason.
"How could he do anything so foolish?"
They all ran out and beheld at some distance Tennard and a young Saurian mage standing on an overturned wagon, guarded by several Saurian warriors. Both magicians were reading from the book and pointing their wands at Tassapan Pass, some quarter-mile in front of them. King Heason immediately set out to reach the pair, followed by all the royalty and their bodyguards. The Spovins, General Halford, and Arundel followed. Before the kings could reach them, a burst of arcane energy leapt from the wands to the pass, and the solid stone on either side of the great chasm turned to hot mud, flowing down from its height to fill the pass to a great depth. In moments the mud was stone again, and the pass of Tassapan was no more. With cries of pain, Tennard and the Saurian fell to their knees, holding their left arms, which were now smoking and blistered. The Saurians that had been guarding them now helped them down and called for healers.
"You are right," said Tennard to the Saurian gathered around. "That is too much power to wield unless the need is dire. But the pass is closed, and Menadoc is safe. Oh, the pain! It hurts!"
He held his arm and writhed. One of the healers was trying to ease Tennard's pain, and he finally relaxed, and she focused on repairing his arm and hand. By now the kings and princes had all reached them, the van of bodyguards forming a curtain against curious eyes.
"I thought you had been told," stated King Heason to Tennard. "The magic in the Book of Mud is forbidden."
"Yes, I was, your highness," replied Tennard with humility. "But I could see no other way to close the pass in so short a time. I beg your forgiveness."
"No, my king, I was the one who chose to use the forbidden power to close the pass," said the young Saurian magician. "I felt that the urgency of the moment warranted it. It is I who beg your mercy. Please forgive me."
The Saurian king stood a while in thought, looking past the guards at the smoking ruin that had been the pass. The mass was still giving off wisps of steam. A small ridge of mud had flowed briefly out onto the plain before turning to solid again. A bird somewhere chirped, as if to inquire if all was safe. Slowly the natural sounds returned. He turned to the other kings and asked,
In your wisdom and experience, Highnesses, does the result of this reckless use of power justify forgiveness for these two? They both knew the risk. But if we hold them as blameful, I must join them in shame. For I gave my blessings to the presentation of the book to this young magician. I too thought the result justified the risk.
With a statement like that, the royals could do naught but forgive and express their relief at having a difficult decision made unnecessary.
I think to show that you understand the dire nature of your act, said King Roloff, you should both join us in our mission of repelling the forces of goblins and ogres back at the swamps. Ogres smell horrible at their best, and swamp goblins even more so.
Tennard tested his healed arm and then knelt before King Roloff, as did the Saurian mage named Hush. I hear and agree to your conditions, merciful King Roloff. I humbly thank you for the opportunity to redeem myself, said Tennard.
I too thank you, mighty king, for your mercy and this chance to prove myself worthy of forgiveness, said Hush.
That being decided, all agreed that the lack of a pass was more boon than loss. The company of kings, princes, nobility, and their companions headed back to Prince Nicholas's tent, discussing their plans. The Tauren lords Benjamin and Fenris were recovered enough that they joined the conference. The Bokenshirian, Luffen, and Dwarven generals were summoned and informed of the change in plans. They then left to address their armies and make plans to depart in the morning for the defense of the Bokenshire border. As these men had been all keyed up for battle and had not had to fight, it would be good to get them moving. General Sard was assigned to watch the site of the former pass to make certain that the giants did not find a way to break through. He bade a warm farewell to Windy and placed a dozen men in Dell's charge to see that to her safety. King Thurel, King Roloff, King Heeson, and Prince Dorandur would move on the swamp goblins and their ogre allies to make their point and see if an agreement could not be reached. General Randon, General Halford, and Lady Spoven, with the main force of men, would remain with Prince Nicholas and back up his authority with swords. Just as all was being settled, an army of elves marched up to the camp and hailed them.
Late as usual, commented King Heeson with a smile.
Why are they here? Inquired King Thurel.
The elves meant to join us en route, but faced a delay, said King Heeson. They are here to ensure that the lands are safe and the giants defeated.
Elves? Said King Roloff, eyes wide.
We have discussed the situation and the changes in men with the elves, and they agreed that it is time for all Soshire, or Menodoc, to respond as one people, said King Heeson. They are late, but they are here.
I suppose that we will have to learn to see all of our neighbors with new eyes, said King Thuril. A group of 5 elves walked up to the kings and nobles, stopping to kneel with great dignity and formality. Greetings, O mighty kings, said their leader. I am Tharandil of the Green Forest Elves. We come to aid, or at least to help celebrate your triumph in this time of mighty changes. Please accept our respect and the offering of friendship. After glancing around to confirm his role, King Thuril replied, Greetings and welcome to you, Tharandil. On behalf of all of the lands of men here in Menodoc, we accept your friendship and return the respect. It is indeed a time of mighty change. We hope that these meetings with those who were formerly strange to each other bid good tidings for the future. We are just now bound for the great western swamps and a disagreement with the goblins there. You are welcome to join or observe the battle as you might wish. Please, let us take hands upon it. In a scene worthy of a great painting, King Thuril, King Heeson, and Lord Tharandil each took each other's hands in friendship before the remaining kings, princes, even Dorandir, joined in the circle to bind the shattered lands of Menodoc together. Arundel carefully stood behind General Sard, where he remained out of sight. He could not join the elves, as he was still officially an outcast. Thranduil's second in command was Farandil, Arendel's father, and he could not allow himself to be seen. Early the next morning, those heading for the swamp took their leave. As priests of the one true God administered final blessings to the thousands of dead, those men staying behind helped the wounded and made repairs to the camp. These might be momentous days in history, but torn canvas does not repair itself, and hungry horses must be fed. So they all smiled and went back to work. The wands of both Tennard and Hush had splintered when they had cast the spell on the pass. Tennard assured Hush that he would make them new wands before they reached the swamp. He and Hush found much to discuss as they traveled. During the journey to the swamp, magical communications resumed, and Tennard spoke with High Master Leary. Finally, he could report that he had an official copy of the Book of Mud, which would answer all the questions that had been worrying over. They agreed that a scholar would assist Tennard in writing an excerpt that was safe for study by the many interested students. The full copy would be placed in a secure vault for limited reference only. No sane mage wanted a repeat of the Riston City disaster. The full extent of the damage from King Henry's magical storm, and what was to be done to repair it, remained to be seen.